Hi, welcome to Budget MTG Decks. All magic fun, all cards under $1. I'm David, and today we're going to be looking at a fun and effective commander deck you can build without breaking the bank. Now, we have but one additional build rule, and that is that all cards must be under $1 in price, with exception of the commander. And we have a sweet commander for you today. We have Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker for 4 and a black, so for 5 mana we get a 2/2 legendary spirit. And this legendary spirit has a sweet ability, and that states that whenever a creature with power 1 or less is put into your graveyard from play, you may return that creature card to play under your control at the end of turn if Shirei, Shizo's Caretaker is still in play. So what is going to be the role of the commander? It's actually going to be a reanimation engine to be able to get to kill all our creatures and then get them back all the time, and it's also kind of to protect our board, to make sure when other people want to kill our stuff, that our stuff keeps on coming back at the end of turn. So the cards that we're going to need to make this work is one commander, 14 fuel cards. These are the cards that go into the engine, that is Shirei. We're going to have 12 engine cards, which are cards that are also going to be helping Shirei get off. And we have 14 removal spells, 22 utility cards, and 37 lands. Now, the ideal turn progression is turn 1, we're going to put down a kind of a removal card. Turn 2, protection. Turn 3, ramp. Turn 4, our commander. Turn 5, a sack outlet. And turn 6, a draw card. So there we go. Let's get started with the fuel cards first. We divided the fuel cards into 2 categories. Tokens, so stuff that creates tokens, and fodder, which are cards that we like to sacrifice, which are not going to be per se tokens. The first of our cards is Doom Dissenter for 1 and a black. So for 2 mana, we get a 1/1 human, and when this creature dies, we're going to create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So as we can see, Doom Dissenter has power 1, which means that if we sacrifice or some other way kill Doom Dissenter, we're going to be able to get back a 2/2 black zombie if Shirei's on the battlefield. So what's cool is if we have a sack outlet, we can do this every single turn. Now, this is not only your turn, but also in our opponent's turn. Basically, so if we have 4 players, and every time that it goes around the table, we're going to be able to get 4 2/2 black zombie creature tokens if we have Shirei and a sack outlet and Doom Dissenter on the battlefield. It's pretty sweet. Skirkdag High Priest costs 1 and a black, so for 2 mana, it's a 1/2 human cleric with Morbid, which means that if a creature died this turn, we can tap this one and 2 other untapped creatures to create a 5/5 black demon creature token with flying. Now, of course, we're going to have, even if we use a removal to kill something, we don't have to sacrifice one of our own things, but it's going to become very easy for every single turn to be able to put down 1 5/5. Now, we can't do this in our opponent's turn because obviously it will only untap again in our upkeep. So we can only do this one time going around the table, but still pretty sweet. A 5/5 is nothing to sniff at. Desecrated Tomb costs 3 mana. It's an artifact, and it states that whenever 1 or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. So it's really cool. So what's going to happen is it's going to be our main phase. We're going to sacrifice a bunch of our creatures, and these creatures are going to go into the graveyard, and then they're going to leave the graveyard when they come back at the end of the turn. And it doesn't matter if all these creatures died at the same time. They're going to be, because they died one by one, they're also going to be leaving one by one. So you will get a 1/1 flying bat per creature that died and comes back at the end of the turn with Shirei's ability. Lightning Coils is next, also costs 3 mana, is also an artifact, and it states that whenever a non-token creature you control is put into the graveyard from play, we're going to put a charge counter on this thing. So, you know, we've got a lot of just regular creature cards, not just tokens, but we also have a lot of regular creatures that we're going to be sacrificing and getting back, and every time that we do that, we're going to be putting a counter on this thing. And it states that at the beginning of your upkeep, if there are 5 or more charge counters on Lightning Coils, we're going to remove all of them and then put that many 3/1 red elemental creature tokens with haste onto play, and remove them at the, we're going to exile them at the end of the turn. So what's really cool is that this thing's going to be on the battlefield. We've got, for example, our Doom Dissenter, you know, we're sacrificing that every single turn. We're getting charge counters on this once it's got 5 or more, because of course you can, it could be that you sacrifice a whole bunch of creatures before it reached 5, so you could have 10 charge counters on it, and when it's your upkeep, you're going to remove those 10 charge counters, for example. You're going to get 10 3/1s, you're going to have haste, bam, we're going to attack with them. If they didn't kill them all, we could still sacrifice them to our sack outlets to get some benefit before we have to exile them at the end of the turn, which is super sweet. Mimic Vat is next, also costs 3 mana, is also an artifact. It's got Imprint, which means that whenever a non-token creature dies, you may exile the card, and if you do, return each other card exiled with Mimic Vat to its owner's graveyard. So essentially what you're going to be doing is whenever another non-token creature dies, you're going to put it underneath this card, and if there was another card before that, then that card's going to go to the graveyard before the other card goes underneath this one. And then it states that for 3 mana and tapping it, we can create a token that's a copy of the card exiled with Mimic Vat. It gains haste, and we exile at the beginning of the next end step. So it's really nice. We're able to get cool cards that have either enter the battlefield or die abilities, because we can also use the creature before it dies. We could sacrifice it to kill it anyway, instead of exiling it, so that's pretty sweet. And what's also very important to remember is that this not only works with our own creatures, but it states whenever a non-token creature dies. It doesn't have to be your creature, which is very important. Sifter of Skulls is next for 3 and a black. So for 4 mana, it is a 4/3 Eldrazi. This one's devoid, which means it's black. It's not black, I mean. So remember, if there's a card that, for example, gives a discount to black creatures, this one does not get that because it's devoid. It also states that whatever the non-token creature you control dies, we're going to put a 1/1 colorless Eldrazi Zion creature token onto the battlefield. And it also has sacrifice this creature, add 1 colorless to your mana pool. So it's nice because this thing's going to be sitting on the battlefield. We're going to be sacking our regular non-token creatures every time. We're going to be getting 1/1 little Eldrazi, and we can use those either to attack with, we can use them as mana, or we can use them as fodder to sacrifice to something else. Open the Graves is next for 3 and 2 black. It's an enchantment that states whenever a non-token creature you control dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. Now, very simple. Just our non-token creatures are dying, we're sacrificing them, they're coming back, and every time that one of those dies, we're going to get a 2/2 zombie. Then we have the last of the token creators, and that is Ogre Slumlord for 3 and 2 black. So for 5 mana, it is a 3/3 Ogre Rogue, and it states that whenever a non-token creature dies, you may put a 1/1 black rat creature token onto the battlefield, and rats you control have death touch. Now, what's so powerful about this, guys, that it does not only count your creatures dying, your non-token creature, but when anybody's non-token creature dies, and your rats, regardless of whether they're rats created by Ogre Slumlord, they all have death touch, which is very, very powerful. Once again, you can use them to attack, use them to block, use them as fodder for sacrifice outlets, whatever you want. It's beautiful. Then we move on to the fodder cards. So these are the cards that like being sacrificed, but they're not going to be producing tokens per se. So the first one is Hope of Girapur, costs 1 mana. It's a legendary artifact creature Thopter. It's a 1/1 flyer, and it states that we can sacrifice it, and then at the end of until our next turn, target player who was dealt combat damage by this card this turn can't cast non-creature spells. So it's really powerful with Shirei, because actually when this thing's on the battlefield, we attack with it. We deal damage, then we're gonna sack it, say, okay, you can't cast non-creature spells anymore. So that's shutting that entire area down, which is really nice against people who like to play counter spells, that kind of stuff. We're shutting that entirely down. It's sacrificed, so it goes to the graveyard, Shirei triggers, and at the end of the turn, it's gonna come back. So next turn we can do it all over again. So we can basically, if somebody is not able to put down, you know, let's say a 2/2 flyer or something, we can lock them out of playing non-creature spells, which is going to hurt some opponents a lot. Next, Heap Doll costs 1 mana. It's a 1/1 Scarecrow. It states sacrifice Heap Doll, remove target card in a graveyard from the game. So this is nice. This is basically our card which we can use to continually remove cards from our opponent's graveyards. Either it's really cool because we can either leave them alone, and when they target something in the graveyard, we say, in response, I'm going to sacrifice Heap Doll. Bam, that card's now exiled, and they can't get their effect, which is super brutal. Or if they're not doing that time, every turn, just trigger and get something out. What's also really nice about this card is that it sacrifices itself. It can sacrifice itself, which means you don't actually need another sack outlet in order to be able to trigger some of the engines, which like stuff dying, for example. Next card, Burglar Rat, costs 1 and a black, so for 2 mana it's a 1/1 rat, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent discards a card. This is absolutely brutal. If you're able to trigger this every single turn, during every single player's turn, it's gonna get really, really brutal. And the best part about this card is, of course, it doesn't hit you. You don't have to discard anything. Next, Zulaport Cutthroat, costs 1 and a black. It's a 1/1 human rogue ally, and states that whenever this guy or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Needless to say, you know, we're sacrificing our stuff, and we keep on getting them back, but we're also gaining life and we're also dealing damage to each opponent constantly. And this may not seem like a lot, but this actually does win games because it really gets out of control very fast. Especially once you've got a nice board, when you've got your tokens, your fodder, your engine, Shirei's on the battlefield, bam, you're just dealing so much damage all the time and gaining so much life, keeping you in the game. Speaking of gaining life, we have Bottle Gnomes for 3. It is a artifact creature gnome. It is a 1/3, and it can sacrifice itself to gain us 3 life. Once again, you may say, okay, this doesn't seem very impressive. It's just a 1/3. It gains 3 life. Who do we care? What do we care? No. This is actually very strong in this deck, being able to during everybody's turn, sacrificing it and gaining 3 life gets out of control really fast. And additionally, it is one of those creatures that can sacrifice self. So once again, you don't need the sack outlet to already start getting that value from the other cards, like the token creators, for example. Then we have Sorceress Queen for 1 and 2 black. It's a 1/1 sorceress, and we can tap it to make target creature other than Sorceress Queen become a 0/2 until the end of turn. Now this card is actually very versatile. It's got 2 ways of being used. Either we use it to make sure that one of our creatures that is not a power 1 or less creature, we got a couple of those, and in order to make them a 0/2, so that when they die, we actually get it back at the end of the turn, which is very nice. So for example, we might have a 6/6 creature, and somebody targets, says, okay, I'm going to destroy your 6/6, and you can say, okay, tap Sorcerer's Queen. Now it's not a 6/6, now it's a 0/2. It dies, and when it hits the graveyard, it's a 0/2, which means at the end of the turn, it'll come back through Shirei's ability. Or we can use it as a deterrent. You know, when somebody else is going to be attacking us with something big, somebody else might say, okay, I'm going to attack you with a 6/6, and you say, okay, I'm going to tap it. Now your 6 is 0/2, and I'm going to block it with 2 of my 1/1s, and then it dies. So that's very nice. All right, that is it for the fuel cards. Let's have a look at the engine cards. The engine cards are what really make the deck work. We divided that into sack outlets and protection cards. So the sack outlet allows us to kill our stuff so that it can come back and get value from either enter the battlefield or death triggers. And the protection cards make sure that that Shirei stays on the battlefield so that we can actually keep on getting our stuff back. The first of our sack outlets is Bloodthrown Vampire. For 1 and a black, it is a 1/1 vampire, and it states that we can sacrifice a creature to give Bloodthrown Vampire +2/+2 to the end of turn. What's really important is that Bloodthrown Vampire and all other points in time is just a 1/1, which means that if it dies, boom, it's going to go to the graveyard, and the Shirei is going to come back onto the battlefield. And other than that, we can just use it to attack. If nobody blocks, we can, you know, if we've got lots of tokens, we can make it really big, smack our opponent for a lot of damage. Or how it's usually used, and that is simply to make sure that we get those death triggers. We can just sacrifice our own creatures so they can come back at the end of the turn. Spawning Pit is next for 2 mana. It is an artifact, and it states that we can sacrifice a creature to put a charge counter on this card. And for 1 mana and removing 2 charge counters from it, we can create a 2/2 colorless spawn artifact creature token. So this is nice. As the game progresses, we're just using this as a sack outlet, putting those charge counters on it, and then later on, maybe after a board wipe or something, we don't have a lot of creatures, then we just pump a lot of mana into this, and we're just getting tons of 2/2 creatures back, which we can use to continually apply pressure. Then we have Fallen Ideal for 2 and a black. It's an enchantment. Aura, we're going to put this on a creature, and then enchanted creature has flying, and sacrifice a creature. This creature gets +2/+1 until the end of turn. And additionally, when this card is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, we're going to return it back to our hand. So it's really cool. This is actually a sack outlet that's going to stay with us for quite a while. We could put it on Shirei, for example, and then Shirei becomes and a flyer, and is able to deal damage. We can start doing some commander damage by sacking some tokens and hitting with flying, maybe dealing those 21 points of damage. Or we can just use it to make sure that we just sacrifice those creatures so that they come back the whole time. And should Shirei or whatever we put this on die, this is going to go into the graveyard, but we're going to get it back, and we could put it on something else so we don't really lose our sack outlet. Then we have Flesh Eater Imp for 3 and a black. So for 4 mana, it is a 2/2 Imp with flying and infect. And additionally, sacrifice a creature. This guy's going to get +1/+1 to the end of turn. This is a win condition, essentially. This is going to come down, yes, throughout the game. We can use it as a sack outlet, just not even attacking with it, just making sure we kill our stuff so we can get the value back. But we can also do is just attack with it, and then we can sacrifice 8 creatures, and then we can just kill somebody. So yeah, so once we got a couple of tokens, this thing with flying and infect ends games very fast. And the last of the sack outlets is Phyrexian Plague Lord for 3 and 2 black. It's a 4/4 carrier, and we can tap it and sacrifice itself to make sure the target creature gets -4/-4 until the end of turn. We don't really want to be doing that unless we're super desperate, because then we lose our sack outlet. What we can also do is sacrifice a creature, and then target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn. This is great against those regenerate creatures. This is great against indestructible creatures. Just make sure we got a lot of tokens. We can use it as a sack outlet, but we can also just use it as removal. So it does so much for us. Beautiful, beautiful card. Then we move on to the protection cards. The first of the protection cards is Dark Privilege for 1 and a black. It's an aura. It gives the enchanted creature +1/+1, and sacrifice a creature, regenerate enchanted creature. Okay, we're going to want to put this on Shirei. So sometimes we don't want to cast Shirei at turn 5. We want to wait till turn 7, maybe start putting some other engine and fuel cards down first. Because if we can put down Shirei and put Dark Privilege on there with a couple of extra creatures, it makes sure that if somebody were to target it with some kind of destroy effect or board wipe, it doesn't matter. We can just sacrifice one of our other creatures, which will probably come back at the end of the turn, and we regenerate it. We can do it as many times as we want. So it's a sack outlet and protection in 1. Then we have Swiftfoot Boots for 2 mana. It's equipment, and equipped creature has hexproof and haste, and equip is only 1. So this is really nice. Put it on Shirei. The haste doesn't really matter, but the hexproof is quite relevant to make sure that it's not targeted by, for example, exile effects. Mask of Avacyn is next for 2, an equip cost of 3. Equipped creature gets +1/+2 and has hexproof. It's important with this is that, yeah, we're going to put it on Shirei. We don't really want to be putting it on any of our creatures which have 1 or less power, because then this is going to pump its power, and then when it dies, it won't come back anymore. Whisper Silk Cloak costs 3 mana with an equip cost of 2, and then equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud. So this is really nice for Shirei, again, to make sure it doesn't get hit by targeted removal. But it's also really nice to put it on, for example, Flesh Eater Imp, because then the creature is going to be unblockable, essentially, and untargetable, and we're going to be able to kill our opponent with infect damage super easily. But, you know, you can also just put it on what is it called? Bloodthorn Vampire, indeed. And then pump its power and toughness, bam, swing, and then kill somebody. So that's going to get out of control really fast. The Whisper Silk Cloak is a great card for finishing games. Then we have Blessing of Leeches for 2 and a black. It's an aura, and you may play Blessing of Leeching anytime you can play an instant. So this is really cool. It's very unusual. People don't really expect that, so keep that 3 mana open. And at the beginning of your upkeep, you're going to lose 1 life. Okay, that's a downside, but we've got plenty of ways of gaining this life in this deck, so it doesn't really bother us that much. And for 0 mana, we can regenerate enchanted creature. This is absolutely amazing. Essentially, you got Shirei in the battlefield, make sure you got 3 mana open. Don't play it unless somebody plays some kind of targeted removal that you can protect with regenerate, so not exile effects, obviously. But anything destroys or a board wipe, bam, pay the 3 mana, it's on there, regenerate, somebody wants to destroy again, regenerate, you can regenerate as many times as you want, and that is absolutely brutal. Horror of Horrors is next for 3 and 2 black. It's an enchantment. It's a sacrifice a swamp, regenerate target black creature. Now, all of our creatures except for the devoid creature are black, so we can regenerate anything we want, except of course also a couple of artifact creatures. But most of the stuff, especially Shirei, black, which means that we can, once later on, we've got all those lands, we've got plenty of ways of getting more lands, so it doesn't really matter if we sacrifice a swamp every now and then to make sure that we can regenerate Shirei and keep Shirei on the battlefield. It's important that it doesn't have to be an untapped land. It could just be one that we already use for mana anyway. And the last of the protection cards is Orbs of Warding for 5 mana. It's an artifact. It states you have hexproof, and if a creature would deal damage to you, prevent 1 of that damage. Okay, so this protects us in 2 ways. Very sweet. The last ability stops us from getting pinged to death by 1/1 tokens, for example. Anybody's going wide, attacking us with lots of 1-powered creatures. That does nothing to us anymore. Somebody could have 50 1/1 spirits attack us. It's going to do absolutely no damage, which is just amazing. And secondly, the first ability, you have hexproof, which means we can basically keep our graveyard, which is very important, keep it safe from our opponents, make sure they don't exile anything, especially if Shirei was off the battlefield for a little bit, maybe some creatures went to the graveyard. We have ways of getting stuff back from the graveyard, but we don't like it if somebody exiles our graveyard. And by having hexproof ourselves, usually stuff that exiles our graveyard targets a player, and now they won't be able to do that anymore. So that is going to be super, super sweet. Those are the engine cards. Let's have a look at the removal cards. We divided the removal cards into 3 categories: instant, repeatable, and board wipe. Now, there's quite a lot of removal spells in here because this deck is not blisteringly fast. It needs a lot of the pieces to get going. Once it's got all the pieces, it's absolutely brutal, but it needs that time. So we got plenty of removal in there to make sure that nobody overruns us. We're going to start with the instant spells. That is Tragic Slip for a single black. It's an instant. Target creature gets -1/-1 until the end of turn, but it gets -13/-13 if a creature died this turn. Now, we have lots of ways of killing our own stuff, so we have absolutely no problem in triggering Morbid whenever we want to. And of course, -13/-13 gets around Indestructible, gets around Regenerate. It's beautiful for single black mana. Vicious Offering costs 1 and a black. It's an instant. It's going to make sure that target creature gets -2/-2 until the end of turn. But if we sacrifice a creature in addition to paying its normal mana cost, the creature is going to get -5/-5 until the end of turn. So cool. It's a one-time sack outlet, and it also is going to be able to get around that Regenerate and Indestructible stuff. Malicious Affliction is next for 2 black. It's an instant. We're going to destroy target non-black creature, but if a creature died this turn, we're going to be able to destroy 2 non-black creatures, which is very nice for 2 black mana, being able to kill 2 non-black creatures at instant speed. Then we move on to the repeatable removal. First one is Fume Spitter for a single black. It's a 1/1 horror, and we can sacrifice it to put a -1/-1 counter on target creature. Now this is repeatable. Why? With Shirei, it's a 1/1, which means that it can sacrifice itself, goes to the graveyard, we put a -1/-1 counter on something, end of the turn it comes back, and then in our opponent's turn we're going to do it again, put another -1 counter, then the next opponent's turn, bam, we're going to do it again. So that means we can constantly, as long as Shirei's on the battlefield, keep on putting those -1/-1 counters on target creature. Then we have Perilous Mirror for 2 mana. It is a 1/1 mirror, and when this guy dies, it deals 2 damage to target creature or player. So what's really cool about this, the damage is quite a lot. It's going to be able to kill all those 2/2s and a lot of those utility creatures every single time. The downside of this card is it doesn't sacrifice itself. There's a lot of these creatures, and that's why the sack outlet is very important, that we have that so that we can actually use the sack outlet to kill Perilous Mirror. You know, because it's very hard to make sure that people attack into us and then we can block. I mean, people are going to know that we're going to do that. Abyssal Gatekeeper is next for 1 and a black. It's a 1/1 horror, and when this one dies, each player sacrifices a creature. And this also gets around Indestructible, gets around everything actually. Gets around Hexproof, gets around Regenerate. When people gotta sacrifice stuff, especially against Voltron decks, which only have 1 or 2 creatures, being able to have our opponents sacrifice stuff is going to be brutal. Remember that we also have to sacrifice something, so make sure that you don't have this card and Shirei on the battlefield and then decide to sacrifice Abyssal Gatekeeper to a sack outlet, because then we're going to have to sacrifice Shirei too, and you really don't want that. So make sure you got a few extra fodder creatures, some tokens to sacrifice. Then we have Bone Shredder for 2 and a red. It is a 1/1 flying minion. And when this thing enters the battlefield, destroy target non-artifact, non-black creature. And what's really cool about this is that it's got an echo cost for 2 and a black, which means at the beginning of your upkeep, if this came under your control since the beginning of your last upkeep, we're going to sacrifice it unless you pay its echo cost. So what's really cool is that actually at the beginning of your upkeep, every single time you don't pay for its echo cost, and it's going to die, and then it's going to come back again at the end of the turn. So you're going to be able to hit people twice with it, which is very nice. And of course, then later on, you can just sack it to your sack outlet and just do it over and over again. Royal Assassin is next for 1 and 2 black. It's a 1/1 human assassin, which we can tap to destroy target tapped creature. This is also very repeatable. If somebody attacks us with something and the creature taps before the combat damage step, we can already tap Royal Assassin to kill it, so we take no damage. And it really stumps people from targeting us. And yeah, it's absolutely beautiful card. And what's also great about it is that it does have 1 power, which means that should somebody remove it, somebody kill it somehow, then Shirei will make sure it comes back at the end of the turn. Meteor Golem costs 7 mana. It's a lot of mana. It is a 3/3 artifact creature golem, and it states that whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Okay, why is this in here? Why is it so expensive? This is a mono black deck. It has great difficulty dealing with artifacts, enchantments, that kind of stuff. we're good at killing creatures. That's what black is really good at. That's what deck is really good at. But sometimes you just need to hit that enchantment, that artifact which is there. And the best way to do that is with something like this. Why? Because it comes in, it destroys that permanent. Then what we can do is we can use a sack outlet to kill it. Yes, we could use our sorceress to get it back immediately. That would be awesome. But we won't always have the sorceress, but we do have plenty of other ways to get creatures back from our graveyard. And then we're going to take it back to hand, we're going to recast it. Yes, it's very expensive, but we still can get repeatable removal effects from this Meteor Golem. Then we have the last of the repeatable cards, and that is Butcher of Malakir for 5 and 2 black. So for 7 mana, it is a 5/4 Vampire Warrior with flying. And when this one or another creature you control dies, each opponent sacrifices a creature. Now we got plenty of tokens, we've got plenty of sack outlets. We're going to sack all our stuff, we're going to get all our stuff back. And our opponents are going to have to sacrifice so many creatures. We can just basically keep our opponent's boards empty from all their creatures with Butcher of Malakir, a sack outlet, and 1 or 2 of the fodder creatures that we can keep getting back with Shirei. It is absolutely brutal. They have to deal with this. Unfortunately, it does have power 5. We won't get it back, but once again, there are ways that we can get it back from the graveyard regardless anyway. Then we move on to the board wipes. The first one is a Crux of Fate for 3 and 2 blacks for 5 mana. It's a sorcery. We choose one, either destroy all dragon creatures or destroy all non-dragon creatures. We're probably going to choose destroy all non-dragon creatures. Hit everything. Hopefully we will have one of the regenerate protection effects on Shirei, so we can just regenerate Shirei through this destroy all non-dragon creatures thing, and the other stuff can die. If ours doesn't matter because Shirei will get it back. Steel Hellkite is next for 6 mana. It's a 5/5 flying dragon, and for 2 mana we can give it +1/+0 until the end of turn. But the reason why this card is in here is because we can pay X and then we destroy each non-land permanent with exactly converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt damage this turn. We can only do this once per turn. So this is really nice. This also is going to hit those artifacts or enchantments or other stuff that we have difficulty hitting. It's especially nice against token players, because then we just pay 0 and then we destroy all their tokens. So this is really essentially, it's the board wipe that you need at that point in time. Then we have Extinguish All Hope for 4 and 2 blacks. So for 6 mana, we're going to destroy all non-enchantment creatures. You know, make sure Shirei is protected with some kind of regenerate ability, and then we have no problem with this whatsoever. And the last of the board wipes is Deathbringer Regent for 5 and 2 blacks. So for 7, it is a 5/6 flying dragon, and whenever this guy enters the battlefield, if you cast it from your hand and there are 5 or more other creatures on the battlefield, destroy all other creatures. Once again, make sure Shirei is protected by something. Otherwise, yeah, it will wipe the board. It is repeatable in the sense that if it dies, if we can sacrifice it and we can get it back to our hand, we can recast it again. That works really well. But there's also ways that we can get stuff back from the graveyard directly onto the battlefield. But then remember that we didn't cast Deathbringer Regent, so then it won't work that way. That is it for the removal cards. Let's have a look at the utility spells. We divided the utility spells into 3 categories: those that draw us cards, recursion, so getting stuff back from the graveyard, and ramp cards. Our first draw card is Dusk Legion Zealot for 1 and a black. It's a 1/1 vampire soldier, and when this thing enters the battlefield, we're going to draw a card and we lose a life. See, this thing is power 1, which means that this is a perfect target for our sack outlet. We're going to kill it, and then end of the turn with Shirei, it's going to come back, enters the battlefield, lose life, draw a card, and then our opponent's turn, we do it again, lose life, draw a card, the next opponent, do it again, lose a life, draw a card. It's going to be giving us so many cards. Very similar to Sky Scanner for 3 mana. It's a 1/1 Flying Thopter. And when this thing enters the battlefield, draw a card. Essentially the same. It costs a little bit more, but it doesn't lose us a life every time it enters the battlefield. Mindless Automaton is next for 4 mana. It's a 0/0 artifact creature construct, and it enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. We can also pay 1 mana and discard a card to put a +1/+1 counter on it. But more importantly, we can remove 2 +1/+1 counters from it to draw a card. So essentially what we can do with this is it's going to come in for 4 mana. It's going to be a 2/2. Then whenever we want, every single turn, we can remove 2 +1/+1 counters off from it, draw a card. Its toughness is going to be 0. It's going to die. It's going to go to the graveyard as power 0, which means at the end of the turn, Shirei is going to make sure it comes back to the battlefield. And then in our opponent's turn, we can do it again, drawing us a card every single turn. Then we have Grim Horror Specs for 2 and a black. It's a 3/2 human wizard with morph for 1 black. But more importantly, whenever another non-token creature you control dies, draw a card. So all these creatures, like for example the Dusk Legion Zealot, Sky Scanner, etc., all the other creatures that we had in the fodder section, all these non-token creatures, whenever they die due to either sacrificing themselves or the sack outlet, Grim Horror Specs is going to draw us a card. It's important to remember that this thing does have power 3, so if this thing dies, Shirei won't get it back. Midnight Reaper costs 2 and a black. It's a 3/2 zombie knight, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. So essentially, almost essentially the same, except for the fact that now it will cost us 1 life for every card that we draw. Dark Prophecy is next for 3 black mana. You may say, oh, that's hard to cast, but not really here because we're playing mono black. We've got plenty of swamps, so this thing is super easy to cast with the 3 black cost. It's an enchantment. It states that whenever a creature you control dies, you draw a card and you lose life. So essentially the same as Midnight Reaper, but now not on a body, stays on the battlefield longer. Then we have Smothering Abomination for 2 and 2 black. So for 4 mana, we got a 4/3 Devoid Flyer. This thing's not black. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature, and whenever you sacrifice a creature, draw a card. So make sure that when you pop this onto the battlefield, you don't only have Shirei. Make sure maybe you got a couple of other creatures, because if somebody removes 1 creature and then Smothering Abomination will make sure that you have to, for example, sacrifice Shirei. You really don't want that. But if you got a couple of other creatures, you got that engine going, then this thing will not only be able to draw us a card every single turn, because at the beginning of the upkeep we're going to sacrifice one of our creatures that's going to come back at the end of the turn, but if you have another sack outlet and a bunch of fodder creatures and we're able to sacrifice those, then it's going to trigger for all of those as well. And this card, we've had playtesting games where this thing, together with the sack outlet and a couple of fodder cards, just draws an insane amount of cards. Krav the Unredeemed is next for 4 and a black. It's a 3/3 demon. And it also partners with another card, but that's not in here, so that's not really relevant. The only relevant part is that for 1 black mana and sacrificing X creatures, target player draws X cards and gains X life. And we're going to put X +1/+1 counters on Krav the Unredeemed. Once again, we've got plenty of fodder cards. We're just going to pay 1 black, sacrifice, let's say 4 creatures. Then we're going to draw 4 cards, gain 4 life, put 4 +1/+1 counters on this thing, and then those 4 cards at the end of the turn probably are going to come back at the end of the turn on top of that to redo it once again. So this thing keeps us in the game and refills our hand instantly. Harvester of Souls is next for 4 and 2 black. It's a 5/5 demon with Death Touch, and whenever the other non-token creature dies, you may draw a card. So what's really cool about this one, it's not only our creatures like the cards we saw before. This one is whenever any non-token creature dies, we're going to be drawing a card. And of course, a 5/5 Death Toucher is a great beater as well. Then we move on to the recursion cards. These are the cards going to help us get stuff from the graveyard back that Shirei wasn't able to get back. The first one is Apprentice Necromancer for 1 and a black. It's a 1/1 zombie wizard, and for a black, and tapping it and sacrificing this card, we're going to return target creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. That creature gains haste, and at the beginning of the next end step, sacrifice it. So it's really nice. This thing comes in super cheap. We get it back with Shirei because its power is 1. We're going to be able to get something else back, either one of those big creatures, so we can hit our opponents with the ones because it's had haste, and then we sacrifice and maybe get a death trigger. But if we get back something with power 1 or less, then actually it's going to stay, because even if we sacrifice it in the turn with Shirei, it's going to come back again. So we can completely get all those creatures back that somehow ended up in the graveyard, which Shirei couldn't save before. Dutiful Attendant costs 2 and a black. So for 3 mana, it's a 1/2 human warrior. And when this thing dies, return another target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So it's cool. Once you get your sack outlet, every single turn you can sacrifice this thing. It's going to come back, but it's going to bring something back from the graveyard back to our hand as well. Very similar to Cadaver Imp for 1 and 2 black. It's a 1/1 flying imp, and when this thing enters the battlefield, may return target creature card from our graveyard to your hand. So it already does it right when it comes in. Dutiful Attendant does it when it leaves. Essentially the same thing. And the last of the recursion cards is Hell's Caretaker for 3 and a black. So for 4 mana, it's a 1/1 horror, and we can tap it and sacrifice a creature. return target creature card from the graveyard to the battlefield, and we can only do this during our upkeep. So we can't do this multiple times, not only because it's got the tap ability, but also because it has to happen during our upkeep. Doesn't cost us any mana. It can sacrifice itself, so we can tap it and sacrifice itself to return a creature card from the graveyard back to the battlefield. And we don't have to sacrifice that creature anymore at the end of the turn. So every single turn, we can return something big from the graveyard to the battlefield. It doesn't have to be a 1/1, and it will stay there. So it's beautiful. But we can also use it. It doesn't have to sacrifice itself. We can also sacrifice something else, get the death trigger, and have that thing come back as well to get like an extra sack outlet. Then we move on to the ramp cards, and the first one is Charcoal Diamond for 2 mana. It's an artifact that gives us taps for black, but it comes in tapped. Star Compass also costs 2, comes in tapped, but give us mana of any color or basic land you control could produce, which is going to be swamp, so that's going to be black. So essentially the same. Prismatic Lens also costs 2, taps for a colorless this time, but we can put 1 mana and tap it to put in 1 mana of any color. Not really relevant in this deck. Then we have Mind Stone, also costs 2, taps for a colorless, but we can also pay 1 mana and tap it and sacrifice it to draw a card. Worn Power Stone costs 3 mana, enters the battlefield tapped, but taps for 2 colorless mana. And Bantu's Monument also costs 3 mana, but this one ramps in a different way. This one just states that black creatures you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is nice because it actually gives us a discount on all our black creatures. And whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses life and you gain a life. So we kind of drain our opponents as well as we're playing the game. Then we have Pilgrim's Eye. Pilgrim's Eye costs 3 mana. It's a 1/1 Thopter with flying, and when it enters the battlefield, we're going to search our library for a basic land card. It's going to be Swamp, put it into our hand, and shuffle our library. It doesn't really ramp, but it does make sure that every single time we sacrifice this thing and it comes back, we're going to be able to get an extra land to our hand to make sure we never miss our land drops. Very similar is Liliana Shade for 2 and 2 black. It's a 1/1 Shade, and when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a Swamp. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So once again, if we kill this thing every single turn, we're going to be able to get a swamp. Make sure we hit those land drops. But it also has pay 1 black. This thing gets +1/+1 until the end of the turn. So later on, it is also kind of a win condition. If we can attack with it, people don't block it, we can pump all our mana and make it really big and deal tons of damage. And the last is Pitiless Plunder for 3 and a black. It's a 1/4 human pirate, and when another creature you control dies, create a colorless treasure artifact token with tap this artifact as 1 mana, sacrifice this artifact, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. So this doesn't say tokens, so you can just use your tokens as well. When those things die, you're getting these treasures, and those treasures give us tons and tons of mana, which gives us any color as well. So also for black, so you could use that into your Liliana Shade, for example. And it's also important to remember that it is a 1/4, which means that if it dies, it will get brought back with Shirei. So that is it for the utility cards. Let's have a look at the lands. The land base for this deck is very simple. It's simply 30 swamps and 7 non-basic lands. We really want to make sure that we have a lot of swamps, not too many non-basic lands. We did put a few in there just to mix it up. First one is Barren Moor, comes in tapped, gives us a black mana when tapped, and we can cycle it for 1 black, which means we can discard this card and then draw a card. So if later on we have already plenty of lands, we can just get a different card. Polluted Mire is very similar, also comes in tapped, also taps for black, but this one's got cycling for 2 generic mana. Desert of the Glorified is up next, also comes in tapped, also gives us a black mana, but has got cycling for 1 generic and 1 black. Then we have Memorial to Folly, enters tapped, gives us a black when tapped, but for 2 and a black, and tapping it and sacrificing it, we can return target creature card from our graveyard to your hand. It gives us 1 more way to get something nice back, which Shirei wasn't able to protect. Everglades comes in tapped as well, gives us a black and a generic mana when tapped, but when it enters the battlefield, we have to return an untapped swamp back to our hand. And a Rogue's Passage taps for a colorless mana, but for 4 mana and tapping it, we can have target creature be unblockable this turn. Really nice against, for example, the Shade or with the Flesh Eater Imp to end the game. And the last of the non-basics is Cabal Stronghold. It taps for a colorless mana, but we can also pay 3 mana and tap it to add 1 black for each basic swamp we control. We've got tons of swamps as well, so this thing is definitely, as the game progresses, going to be giving us more and more mana. That is it for the lands. Let's have a look at the conclusion. In conclusion, this deck is a lot of fun. It's not an easy deck to play, it's not a fast deck, but this deck has all these fun moving parts. You're basically assembling this engine, this sack engine, and Shirei keeps on getting stuff back. It's very hard to deal with once you're on the battlefield. You've got all the answers, you've got removal to make sure that you get into that late game. Once you get into that late game, you've got Shirei, you got a sack outlet, you got stuff that triggers, gives you tokens when stuff dies, you got stuff that gives you cards when stuff dies, life when stuff dies, you get lands when stuff comes back in, and it's so much fun. You can win this game in so many different ways. You can either win with commander damage, you can win with lots of tokens, you can win with draining, you can win with infect. There's just, this deck never plays the same way, and it's just a lot of fun. Make sure you got all the pieces, and make sure you protect your pieces, and then it is almost impossible for later on in the game for people to be able to stop you, and that is just an absolute blast. People will learn from that probably after first couple of games. They will try and get rid of Shirei very soon, because Shirei is crucial to the game plan of this deck. So make sure that you either play Shirei a little bit later when you've got some pieces on the battlefield, or when you've got some reliable way of protecting it. It's also very affordable, coming into under $26, which is including the lands, commander, everything, and I think that's actually quite an affordable price for such a fun commander. And also, if you like these videos, you want to help us make more, head on over to patreon.com/budgetmtgdecks and consider donating as little as $1 per month. It would really help out a lot, and we really appreciate it. I'd like to thank everybody who's our current patron for making all of this possible. Also join us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Budget MTG Decks. That's where we post all information about new videos coming out, backstage pictures, when we're doing our play testing, all that good stuff. Head on over to social medias, and of course, most importantly, that's where you can get in touch with us. You can talk to us, let us know what you think of these cards, non-budget upgrades, how you would upgrade it. Just let us know over there at Budget MTG Decks. Also subscribe to us here on YouTube for the most powerful decks and device everyone can afford. And if you do, also don't forget to hit the little bell button to be notified when a new video comes out, so be part of the notification squad or crew, whatever you want to call it. The last question I want to ask everybody is, other than the cards you've seen right now, which cards over $1 would you like to include in this deck? Do you think would be a great upgrade for this Shirei mono black sacrifice deck? So let us know in the comments below. That's it. Thanks for watching. I'm David, and this was Budget MTG Decks.